Hi, everyone. Today's episode comes to you with three unexplainable paranormal encounters. We start off in upstate New York to hear what a listener finds in the basement of the house she's staying at, and then on to New York City to learn what follows a girl onto the subway late at night. Finally, we end hearing from a woman who encounters something in middle school that still affects her to this day. So if you're enjoying the channel, don't be invisible. Smash that subscribe button and stay with us for a while. Now let's get into the stories. Hi, Lilith. After listening to some of the paranormal stories on your channel, I thought I would contribute one of my own that happened a couple of years ago. I ran into some hard times when COVID hit. I ended up losing my job because our business had to close and I didn't have much savings built up. I was living in upstate New York at the time and had really been enjoying my independence, but then it was like everything just changed almost overnight. My uncle flipped houses professionally, and he had purchased some cheap property in an old suburb up there. He was willing to let me move in for free while it was being worked on. The house was pretty run down, but it did have an extra bedroom that wasn't in the worst shape, and it had heating and running water, so I moved in and lived on the ground floor with my two cats. Things went along pretty okay for a few months. I didn't know exactly why, but one day these two stray cats started hanging out around my porch. I don't know if my cats attracted them or what. I didn't discourage them at all. I never left food outside, and I kept trying to shoo them away. But they both would just look me in the eye and ignore my shooing and act like they just belonged there. I guess I'm weak when it comes to cats, though, because I'll admit that it wasn't long before I had 4 cats living inside with me. However, right after they moved in, things started getting really weird in the house. I would start hearing strange noises at night, and things would go missing, like pieces of my jewelry. Like I would take off my rings and earrings at night, but then one piece wouldn't be there in the morning. But then that piece would reappear later in the day, making me think I was going crazy. I admit I'm kind of an absent-minded person, so it's not that unusual for me to move stuff and then forget where I put it, but it really felt like it was a lot of things. And then after a month or so, the cats started acting peculiar too. They would gather and hiss at the door to the basement. All 4 of them. One time in the middle of the night, they started yowling so loudly that it woke me up. I went down to check on things, but they all just scattered. So figuring I would get to the bottom of it, I opened the basement door and I headed down to check it out. I got to the bottom of the stairs, but it just looked like a normal, creepy basement to me. And then it got worse. The cats started doing this every single night. They would gather and start hissing and yowling at the basement door. I started thinking maybe there were rats in the basement or something. I didn't know. I told my uncle about it, and he called in an exterminator to lay down poison and traps. And when the exterminator finished, he made a comment about how it was important to keep the cats out of the basement. When he said that, it occurred to me that not once had any of the 4 cats crossed over the basement threshold, even though the door was open on a fairly regular basis. One day, I was in the kitchen doing the dishes, and my uncle was upstairs working on house repairs. Then I heard him walk across the creaky floor up there, and then I heard him break into a full run down the stairs to the first floor and towards the basement door. I assumed he went into the basement because I heard the door slam with so much force that it scared me and I almost dropped the dish I was washing. I then walked over toward the basement door to see what had made him run. I opened it and yelled down at him for being such a bozo. But that's when I heard a noise behind me, and I spun around to see my uncle coming down from upstairs asking me what all the commotion was about. Oh my gosh. Was it not him that had just gone down in the basement, I thought? We were the only 2 in the house. When I realized that he had been upstairs the whole time, my blood ran ice cold. I told him that somebody had run down the stairs and had slammed the door shut to the basement. He went down there to look, but he didn't find anything. So now I was feeling super uncomfortable about living in the house. I mean, the cat sounds at night were getting nuts, and I was so sleep deprived. I honestly started hallucinating. I went downstairs one night to shush the cats once again, and I imagined that I saw this old woman standing in front of the basement door wagging her finger at them. Then they really started yowling. Everything was making me crazy. All of the changes that the pandemic had caused, my stress over losing my job, these weird living arrangements, I was really over it. A week or two later, I made the hard decision to move back home with my parents in Connecticut. My uncle decided to sell the property to some developers. Apparently, none of the repairs were going right. So when he was selling it, he came across some information about an old woman who had lived there alone with her cats for years. The information told him that she was found dead in the basement one day. It seems she had died when she fell down the stairs, and there was a creepy rumor that when the cats found her, they might have chewed on some of her body parts. I can't even really talk about it. That totally grosses me out. And it makes me wonder if the 2 stray cats were associated with her. Well, I couldn't take all 4 cats back to my parents, but fortunately we found somebody willing to adopt them. At least the 2 that showed up at the house. I always get chills when I think about that story, and my uncle, who's a big, strong guy, seemed pretty creeped out, and you could tell that he was relieved to have sold the property. He's always been a very reasonable and not superstitious guy, and I never paid much attention to that kind of stuff either, but now, neither one of us knows what to believe. It was 1992, and I had moved to New York with dreams of becoming a high-profile copyright lawyer. It was something I'd planned for extensively, and both my parents were on board 100%. But that was my plan before I moved to the city. I quickly fell in with a group of regular partygoers. Well, more like ravers. I had no experience whatsoever engaging in that type of life. I was from the Midwest, so I was completely out of my element, and I was only in my mid-20s. But that's sort of what excited me. I was in the greatest city in the world, and I was trying things for the first time in my life. I started reconsidering my life plans, questioning why I had ever wanted to set myself up for a life so serious and so professional. Because the truth was, I was having more fun than I'd ever had in my life. My new friends had grown up in the city, so they were really familiar with the club scene and had a lot of connections in the area. They took me to a new place every weekend where we would dress up in clothing I would never wear in front of my parents, and we would dance the night away until the early morning hours sent us back home to our shoebox apartments. Of course, my parents could not know what I was up to in New York. I was terrified that they would disown me if they knew the truth about my shifting ambitions. One night we ended up at a massive warehouse in Brooklyn. There was a DJ there that my friend was interested in, so we did what we had to do to get in. I didn't feel good about that. I had a pretty straight-edge upbringing and my morals were pretty tight. But like a lot of the things I once felt certain about, my mindset was changing. I was having a great time dancing and socializing with my friends, and I eventually started talking to this guy that I thought was cute. We were chatting and dancing together for a few hours until the people in charge of the rave turned the lights on, signaling that the party was over. I looked around for my friend who I'd come with, but I couldn't find her. I waited by the venue's doors for as long as I could, but the security guards eventually kicked me out, and my friend was still nowhere to be found. Outside, most of the other attendees had already left, and it dawned on me that it was very late, and I was in a different part of town than I was used to. I didn't want to wait outside this warehouse by myself for what could be hours, unprotected, so I started making my way toward the train. I would call the venue in the morning and just go from there. The train wasn't far, but at that time of night, it sure felt like it. There were so few people on the street at that hour, and those who were didn't seem too friendly. The train platform was equally unsettling. There was an old man walking shirtless in circles, 2 inebriated women way down at the end, and me. I silently thanked my stars when the train finally pulled up. I got into an empty train car. I had a little bit of a ride ahead of me, but I was just happy to be safe and inside. But then, the doors connecting my car to the next opened, and this dark figure emerged. It wasn't an MTA worker, it was like a really tall, old-timey businessman with a trench coat and a bowler hat. I looked down at my outfit and I cringed, avoiding eye contact with the stranger. The stranger had entered at the far opposite end of the car and then continued walking in my direction. I figured they were going to continue their passage into the next car, but as soon as they reached me, they sat and stopped directly across from me on the train. I tried to ignore them, but I could see them staring straight at me. And obviously it made me uncomfortable, and I slyly grabbed the bottle of mace that my parents made me keep on hand. I didn't pull it out, I just held it inside my bag. And then finally, I looked up at the person. They were smiling, widely, too widely. Their eyes were expressionless, though. If you covered the lower half of the face, you wouldn't even be able to tell they were smiling. But what struck me immediately was the absence of a nose. I impolitely stared, trying to understand what was sitting in front of me. But the stranger's smile just got wider in unfiltered delight. It was unkind, sort of taunting. I stood up involuntarily, needing to sit somewhere else, or maybe get off at the next stop, or even just relocate to a different train car. But as soon as I did this, the stranger mirrored me. They stood several feet taller than me, and now was only feet away. Just as the train began to slow down, I froze as the stranger's hand rose in front of its face. I didn't know what to think until it touched the brim of its hat and tipped it toward me. But what I realized is there weren't any hands or a wrist. And the more I looked at it, I realized why it was wearing the trench coat. The hem of the coat didn't quite reach the floor, revealing the absence of feet and legs. This thing was just a face, I realized, and the garments were seemingly floating in midair. The train screeched to a halt, and that smile just grew wider before the figure spun around in the air and floated off of the train. I couldn't move, not until the train started up again and lurched forward, making me lose my balance. Now, I don't know who or what I saw that night on the train, but I wasn't going to be riding alone after midnight anymore. And maybe I would ease up on the raves. And, just maybe, I would stick with my initial plans for college. Yeah, that's what I was going to do. I saw something when I was 11 years old, and I have been scared to look in the mirror ever since. The Conjuring came out in 2013, and it was somewhat of a cultural phenomenon. I mean, maybe it was just because I was in middle school, but it seemed as though that was all anybody was talking about. Growing up, my parents were the most strict of all of my friends. This meant monitoring internet access, limiting late-night outings, and certainly no R-rated movies. So you can only imagine 11-year-old me and my excitement to have gotten the green light to stay the night at my friend Lisa's house, one fall night for a Halloween party. I showed up to the party sporting my best Harry Potter attire, and everybody else's costumes looked equally amazing. We carved pumpkins, danced to the Monster Mash, and ate way too much candy. When it came time for lights out, we all huddled in the basement, pulled out our pillows and blankets, and made ourselves cozy. The slumber party portion of the night operated just like you would expect, considering it consisted of 7 or so middle school girls. We had pizza and soda, gossiped, painted each other's nails, and talked about the cutest boys in our grade. That was until Lisa's older brother, Skylar, came downstairs with 2 of his friends and suggested we all watch a movie. Despite Skylar being only a year older than Lisa and all of us girls, it felt as though he and his friends were worlds apart. That's why it came as no surprise that one of the boys had a pirated copy of The Conjuring, and he insisted it would be the perfect movie to watch at a Halloween party. Even though I didn't really like scary movies, I was not going to be the one to suggest that we watch something else. Like I said, this movie was all the rage at the time, and I think all the girls knew that watching it and being able to talk about it at school would make the party even 10 times cooler. Looking back, I wish my mom was there to put a stop to the whole thing, because there is no reason that I should still get goosebumps thinking about that night, nearly 15 years later. Now let me preface this by saying that Lisa's house was creepy as hell. The mere fact that we had to sleep in the basement should already have alluded to that. The house must have been built in a different century. The floors creaked as you walked around, the lights flickered at random times. There was a furnace in the basement, and the only plus side of sleeping down there is that it was the warmest place in the house. But really the worst part of all was the abundance of antique paintings and knickknacks scattered everywhere. I'm talking old porcelain dolls with cracks in the faces, armoires filled with vintage dishes and magazines, portraits of previous homeowners who must have been dead for ages. So yeah, it was the perfect place for a Halloween party, but not really somewhere I would want to live on a regular basis. And certainly not somewhere that would make watching a scary movie any less terrifying than it already was. The Conjuring was easily the scariest movie I have seen, possibly because I steer clear of scary things for the most part these days. That's right, even to this day. But even back then, I remember having to hug my best friend Olivia at the time because she was sobbing over the plot twists and jump scares of the film. When all was said and done, it must have been past 1 a.m., Every girl at the party was either doubled up or tripled up in their sleeping bags because at this point, everybody was having a bad time. But fortunately, within the next 30 minutes or so, everybody fell asleep. That was, everybody but me. My mind was fixated on the fact that The Conjuring was based on a true story. And when I was doing my best not to think of that, the only other thing that popped into my head was how badly I needed to pee and how the bathroom was upstairs. Cutting to the chase, I was faced with a series of which is worse type scenarios. Was it worse to attempt to wake up one of the other girls to come with me because I was too scared to go up alone? Was it worse to wet the bed when I realistically knew there was no way I could hold it until the morning? Or was it worse to face my fears and just go upstairs alone? Ultimately, I choose the last because either of the former had just sounded too embarrassing. I really couldn't afford to have this sleepover go badly when I was rarely invited to events like this, and even rarer, allowed to attend. It took me every bit of 10 minutes to work up the courage to get up the stairs. And that's when all eyes were on me. Every porcelain doll in the living room felt like it was shooting targets through me, and frankly, I felt like I could hurl. I wasted no time skating to the bathroom and slamming the door behind me despite having done my best to keep quiet. I did my business, went to wash my hands, and nearly jumped out of my skin when I glanced at the mirror. For a split second, a grimacing, almost blurry figure was hovering behind me, but in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I washed my hands faster than you can imagine, flung open the door, prepared to sprint back down to the basement, and that's when I saw it. The same figure that was in the mirror, semi-transparent, grimacing, and dark. I remember feeling instantly cold and that the air around me seemed to go still. I slammed the door and I screamed a scream so vile I had no doubt it woke the neighbors. The next few minutes passed in a blur and it's hard to sort out the memories through the haze. All I know is that eventually Lisa's parents came crashing into the bathroom, pleading for me to tell them what was wrong. But I was in like a trance. I couldn't talk. My mom picked me up that night and I have never been so happy in my life to see her. Needless to say, I never went to Lisa's again, nor did I engage with scary movies or sleepovers until well into my high school years. I can't say for sure what it was that I saw that night. All I know is its presence was demonic, and it felt like something straight out of The Conjuring. Regardless of what it was, it's obvious that it affected me tremendously. And like I said, even to this day, I get goosebumps thinking about it. Let me know what you think about these stories in the comments below. And don't forget to check out Donovan Dread, who releases almost every single day. Also, if you like true crime, then check out Donovan Dread True Crime. There are new releases several times a week.